Thank you. So I'm going to, so first of all, thank you for all your kind messages and responses to the videos that I posted, and I'm glad you're finding them useful. I want to say that apart from the 2 videos that I recorded in the last couple of days that respond to the questions that you posed over last week, I have also, with Paul's help, uploaded the bibliography that I refer to, and I tried to find bibliography that is useful for teachers in the sense that they can give it to their pupils also to read. So bibliography that is written mainly by kind of recognizable names, scholars, so kind of I mean, so that you will feel comfortable to kind of, you know, or confident to recommend them to your students, but at the same time kind of a bibliography that absorbs and digests in a clever and kind of incisive way some of the best approaches to subjects. So I'm happy to give more bibliography. Generally, this is what I say to my students at Warwick. I mean, it's all about me using my Adobe Scan app on my mobile. I can happily scan chapters or articles or encyclopedia entries or companion pieces if you so wish. So feel free to contact me again even after the Teachers' Day about this. So I have left a couple of questions to answer, and I would like to share my screen here. So a couple more questions that I were left after I had recorded those 1-hour sessions. So one of you asked me, I would find it particularly helpful if you could include a discussion of the political themes specified by OCR in relation to tragedy. So political ideas and ideals, and also position and role of men, women, and slaves in society. I mean, I will start by saying that, I mean, obviously, as you yourselves know, these are enormous, like unbelievably enormous issues. So if I wanted to summarize, I would need like a week, but I will absolutely do my best to give you some key ideas to take away and to keep in mind when navigating this huge topic. So okay, and I will also, again, like I did before, I will give you bibliography to read and to summarize for your students, and also to give to your students if you feel that they can deal with it. So, so the engagement of Greek tragedy and comedy with politics, I always say it should be seen on a spectrum. Okay, so so there is a huge variety of ways in which Greek drama engages with politics, and also there is a huge variety, I mean, there's a huge variety of things that the word politics can mean in relation to 5th century Athenian literature. So ranging, so this spectrum ranges from, now in all shades, engagement with political thought, okay, political philosophy, which is undertaken. Now this bit becomes a little bit speculative, but I want to help you visualize how the dramatist and its audiences you know, comes in contact with such ideas. So engagement with political thought undertaken in intellectual and philosophical circles of the time. So I mean, so Aeschylus, is an inheritor of pre-Socratic philosophy, which not only dealt with cosmology and natural philosophy, but also with political philosophy. And we currently have, in the middle of the 5th century, we currently have the political thought of the sophists. So this would include not only thought or discourse on issues to do with institutions, especially democracy, okay, on these democratic forms, democratic institutions, but also wider philosophical questions about the experience of living in an organized society. I mean, broadly, and I think you will see that in most of the bibliography that I've given you, that broadly political is defined, very broadly as the experience, as concerning the experience of living in an organized democratic society. We should imagine that intellectual or elite circles to which the poets belonged, because they themselves were elites, would bring them in regular and direct contact with such discourses. Okay, so we wouldn't be surprised if these thinkers and these poets belonged in the same intellectual circles and joined the same symposia and debated these ideas outside the context of the dramatic festivals. And of course, I mean, this is now again, speculative, but this is certainly, I thought of putting this down because it may help your pupils understand that, I mean, when we have elites, okay, elites developing political theory, so the fact, the obligation and the need to take part in a direct democracy on one hand, and the lack of labor needs on the other hand for the elites, okay, they didn't have to go to the fields and they didn't have to go to the markets, and would have encouraged engagement with political thought, political discourse, political discussion, perhaps to a degree that it would be probably inconceivable today. Okay, so this is one end of the spectrum, how Greek tragedy engages with politics, and I kind of define that end of the spectrum as a political kind of thought. And going through that to the other end of the spectrum, where we talk a bit more in more concrete terms, engagement with current political and historical developments, and again, all shades in between. Again, these are on a spectrum, okay, because not every tragedy deals with or engages with current and recent political and historical developments in the same way. Okay, so for example, the Oresteia, I mean, the Oresteia is one example which you will find a lot in the bibliography that I gave you, because the end of the Oresteia closes with direct engagement with a recent democratic institution that has been recently reformed in the context of the radicalization of democracy, and that's the court of Areopagus, which I mean, it's quite, I mean, we even have the whole voting process enacted on stage in front of our eyes, and the goddess Athena taking part in that voting process of putting their votes in large jars. But so, I mean, we're talking about kind of direct engagement to this degree, or as happens, more usually with a place in which we can detect engagement with current political and kind of historical developments, plays like Hecuba or the Trojan Women. These plays seem to be reflecting, but without necessarily direct references, okay, although again, you wouldn't find two scholars exactly agreeing on this, but to recent political decisions taken at the assembly by the Athenians for their allies, or I mean, for their empire subjects. You can find more examples of plays that engage directly with current political and historical developments in the second entry that I have included in this bibliography that the second entry of the two entries of the Encyclopedia to Greek Tragedy that I have uploaded, written by Ian Ruffell, who is a very famous scholar, and that is an entry that is called Greek Tragedies Political Content. So, I mean, happily, if you find something, if you find this piece inspiring or useful, I think you can definitely tell your students to cite it. Okay, so now, I mean, as if this wasn't complex enough, okay, this spectrum that goes, you know, in all directions and have all kind of shades of engagement, as if it wasn't complex enough, we also have always to consider the fact, and always keep it in our minds, that Greek tragedy is a polyphonic medium. And we shouldn't be surprised if we find in the same play or in the same context engagement with, for example, a democratic institution, both in positive and in more critical terms. Okay, so a tragedy is, and I think that's one of the most fascinating aspects about the political discourse of tragedy. And for this, I would very much recommend, and I've uploaded this, I would very much recommend to you to have a look at Edith Hall's chapter on the sociology of Athenian tragedy in the Cambridge Companion to Greek Tragedy, where she analyzes kind of the tragedy as a polyphonic medium and acknowledges the fact that Greek tragic plays can be both, I mean, to put it kind of very simply, can exercise both ideological praise and at the same time exercise serious critique on political ideals, forms, and institutions. And I would say that, for example, one of the best examples in terms of plays for this is the Euripides' Suppliants, which on one hand functions extremely well as an encomium, a praise for the Athenian democracy, and on the other hand, it includes very subtle but very effective critique of the democratic constitution, the democratic forms, as oppressive sometimes for the common person, and this is kind of expressed through the reactions of the chorus. So this polyphony is a beautiful thing. I try to explain it to my students, and I think, you know, they get it. So I don't know how far you will feel that it is possible to do that with your pupils. But I would say, I mean, really young people can be really receptive. So instead of only advancing the ideological, the simple ideological reading of tragedy as a medium that only praises and advances Athenian ideology, I mean, we can very well tell them that there is critique in there as well. And not only with politics, with absolutely everything. Okay, even when you go to kind of the Bacchae, I mean, to take an example, because I know that you want to take examples from the plays that you are teaching. So I mean, the Dionysiac cult, Dionysiac religion in the Bacchae is portrayed as kind of the cult, the par excellence cult of communality and inclusiveness. And yet there are horrific things about kind of the Dionysiac as expressed, you know, in the Bacchae. So for both plays now, I mean, in relation to what I just said at the moment, in relation to the spectrum on which Greek drama engages with politics, kind of broadly understood. So I would say that for both tragedies, I believe that we should look around the end of the spectrum that concerns engagement with political thought or philosophy, ideas and ideals, far more than current developments. Okay, although again, and I'm sorry if this is frustrating, different scholars would espouse different approaches here. And for example, the Oedipus king has been read kind of very much with a kind of a close approach to like, you know, Pericles, in reference to Pericles. Now, as I said, I would recommend reading the entries of the Encyclopedia to Greek Tragedy and Political Thought by John Gilbert, and Greek Tragedies Political Context by Ian Ruffell, to get an idea of the vast spectrum of tragedies engagement with the life of the polis, and then going into other reading, including, and I always recommend this, and your OCR handbook suggests this, the Cambridge Companion to Greek Tragedy, this Deep Place chapter. It's a classic chapter by Cartlidge, and also Seaford's Tragic Tyranny, and also the chapter that I told you by Edith Hall, The Sociology of Athenian Tragedy, although I think that that chapter is best read after you kind of review what the other things that I want to tell you about, you know, women, men, and slaves. So this question included tell us about, you know, about position of women, men, and slaves in society in relation to kind of tragic discourse. I mean, again, it's a huge topic, and again, as I'm sure you know, tragedy is enormously interested in the role of the female. I mean, tragedy is a genre like all genres composed by men for men in a patriarchal context, okay, and yet it is fascinated with the female. Now, when I am sure that you know by now that bibliography for women in Athenian society and women in Greek tragedy, you need tracks to fill them up with all of that bibliography that exists out there. However, let me start with this. When you teach women in Greek drama, I would say try from the very beginning to make a distinction between Athenian ideology and historical reality. It is not the second so much that concerns Greek drama. It is the first, okay? It is the ideology, because ideology is prescriptive and hence far from innocent, okay? Ideology prescribes to people how to be. So the gender ideology prescribes to kind of members of society how to conform to these expected kind of roles from the genders that society imposes. And of course, I mean, you will find very regularly that, you know, in the context of tragic critique of Athenian ideology, often the institution of marriage is a favorite topic. Actually, marriage is never a neutral, you know, term or concept in Greek tragedy. It's always acknowledged to be, I mean, it's the par excellence institution that legitimizes the kind of subject, the exploitation and domination of the female by the male, okay? Now, I have, and I would very much recommend, a wonderful little piece written by a fantastic feminist scholar, Ruby Blondell, which I've also uploaded. It's an introductory piece to this wonderful book, Women on the Edge, 4 Plays by Euripides, which has a subsection, Women in Athens, and then Athenian Women and the Ideology of Gender. It is about 6-7 pages long, and I think that in there you would probably find almost everything you want. If you want more, and if you want the way that Greek tragedy exercises critique on this ideology of gender, then I would recommend to you to contact me so that I give you the introduction to Medea, okay, Euripides' Medea. Okay, I mean, there is implicit critique in the Bacchae about kind of ideology of gender and kind of the way the male is portrayed in the Bacchae in relation to the female. The male is more kind of extreme patriarchy, control, suppression, oppression, and you know, kind of the subject to that is the female. But I mean, the Bacchae again is not the most it's not a play that's the most conducive to teaching attitudes to the male and the female in Athenian tragedy. Now, going forward, so position of women, of men now. Now, this is very nice actually, because we always kind of focus on gender ideology about, you know, women, but I mean, men in Athenian society were equally subjected to prescriptive gender ideology. And in many cases, as we see very much in several plays, it is equally oppressive and sometimes even destructive, okay? And hence, it is subjected to reasonable critique by tragedy, by the play. So what I've done for here is I've found a section from an unpublished PhD thesis, just because it is written in a very accessible manner that you, and I'm sure your pupils will be able to relate to. The thesis is called The Euripidean Men Revisited, 4 Case Studies, and it's about masculinity and the ideology about masculinity, what is expected of men, okay, which very much, and I would say even kind of probably, which very much kind of overlaps with kind of historical reality. I realize I have 5 minutes left, but I think I will be able to finish. And what I would love you to kind of observe here is, as in the case of the ideology of the female gender, the ideology for the male gender can be contradictory and hence elusive, and hence gives food for critique. Okay, so and I think kind of Kokini here kind of deals, you know, quite well with this. So again, Greek tragedy is not just about promoting ideology, that's one part, but there is critique, and that's very, very interesting because Greek tragedy is a polyphonic medium. And finally, slaves. I was, you know, asked. So I found an entry in the Oxford Classical Dictionary, which is actually quite long, and it's written by Paul Cartledge, one of the most famous historians in the world, with further bibliography. Okay, and in there you will read that between, among other things, that between there were about 80 to 100,000 slaves in Athens at the time that they had a total population of perhaps, you know, the 250,000. That being a slave kind of maybe just, I mean, gives you the impression of a uniformity of a legal status, but there were huge variations in the life conditions and degrees of exploitation of different classes and types of slaves. And some of this is reflected in tragedy and comedy. I mean, you will see that the domestic slaves, for example, are not chattel. I mean, they're theoretically chattel, but they are very much heart and soul of the kind of the everyday life of the oikos. Okay, and then after you kind of you understand you do this, I would say that the entry on slaves and slavery in Encyclopedia to Greek Tragedy, which refers specifically in relation to kind of the role of slaves, and I would say it would be useful for your reading of that wonderful character of the Theban domestic slave in Oedipus' King. And his role as part of Oedipus's house, that would be very useful there. Okay, so I expanded again, but I'm sorry, it's not the topic, Paul, that is really rich, and I try to condense it, and it still kind of flows out of my ears. So I mean, I'm finished, but I would very much like to receive your questions by email now, I guess. And I'm happy to answer any questions, and I'm happy to continue the communication with you regarding anything else that might be you might find useful for your teaching. Yes, I can see Giles turned on his.
Yes, so one of the things that the students might be asked to do is to compare tragedy with comedy. So they might be asked something like, does, on the basis of the plays you have read, does comedy or tragedy embody the political ideals of Athens more effectively? So
Okay.
what would you advise students to do for comparing political ideas in comedy versus political ideals in tragedy?
Okay, so I mean, the one thing that definitely which is worth doing here is to acknowledge that always comedy is far more direct. Okay, and since comedy is also more meta-theatrical, it acknowledges the real life around it, something which tragedy cannot do because it will shatter the dramatic illusion. Okay, so comedy by nature being a meta-theatrical genre can put very easily the finger on the pulse of its own time and reach out and talk about current. So comedy doesn't have restrictions in the way it engages with current political life, whereas in tragedy, the restrictions are there. And usually when we see tragedy being meta, it is usually very subtle. So when tragedy is kind of political about specific issues, it is also usually very subtle, with some exceptions, like the Oresteia. So this is one. I mean, there is another one, which is, I mean, comedy has very early on adopted the character of, has very early on antagonizes tragedy in asserting a serious role for itself in society. So this leads to comedy being very outward out there, saying that, listen to me, I will advise you, and you will become better citizens if you listen to me. But that's very much a stance that comedy has adopted. Okay, so this didactic attitude that comedy adopts, which tragedy can't really, again, is another very interesting issue there. And I would say, let's not confuse kind of this didactic stance that comedy adopts with kind of some kind of a really kind of, I mean, let's not translate that as a really frank intention to influence the public. I think neither of the two genres have an outward kind of intention of influencing the public. I mean, of course, other things kind of, you know, like, you know, ad hominem, you know, satire. Again, this is something that comedy can do very freely, tragedy can't really. And if there is any reference, that will be really, really subtle. So I would say, you know, putting the difference between the two genres on that basis, and it's a level of, you can also say that it's a level of degree of engagement. So they both engage, but the degree is different and the manner is different. Okay, so I hope, yeah.
Great, thank you very much. Yeah, that's yeah, you sort of put your finger exactly. You just said it so beautifully. So thank you very much.
Okay, I can see Rebecca.
I just wondered whether you had some advice for which is the best place to look for ideas about religion. So I'm not teaching the Greek theatre, but I do a reading group, and we decided that we'd read a play that might support and help to help to engage them with a sort of on a different level with looking at religion. So
okay,
I wonder if you've got
religion in relation to tragedy again. No.
Okay.
Religion in relation to place. I mean, again, I would tell you to start with something that, you know, that kind of looks like more of a digest in the beginning. So that would be either a chapter in a companion or an entry in an encyclopedia. This would probably give you a very good way into, without giving the students kind of 30, 35 pages. So it's either a kind of encyclopedia of Greek tragedy, or I mean the companion to Greek tragedy by Justina Gregory, or any other of these companions. So if you email me, I can definitely send you something.
That's lovely. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, goodbye and keep in touch. Bye-bye.
Breaking the text, go us, go us.